chairperson of the Public Accounts Committee and now current chairman of the Energy and Power Development Portfolio Committee in Parliament.
We have a constitution that was enacted in 2013. It has provisions for what Parliament should do is in its role as an oversight over entities in Zimbabwe. What are the provisions of the constitution that speak to oversight of Parliament on entities in Zimbabwe?
I think the most important thing before I go to the provisions is that Parliament is there to represent Charlton Hwende, the former chairperson of the Public Accounts Committee and now current chairman of the Energy and Power Development Portfolio Committee in Parliament.
We have a constitution that was enacted in 2013. It has provisions for what Parliament should do is in its role as an oversight over entities in Zimbabwe. What are the provisions of the constitution that speak to oversight of Parliament on entities in Zimbabwe?
I think the most important thing before I go to the provisions is that Parliament is there to represent the people, the ordinary people of Zimbabwe. They vote for members of Parliament, and it's our role to safeguard and ensure that the country's resources are properly used. And in terms of the Constitution, in terms of Section 299, is the main section that gives Parliament the power to ensure that public resources by any entity, agency or ministry are scrutinized initially by the Auditor General, and after the Auditor General, Parliament comes in through the Public Accounts Committee, which is empowered by, in terms of the Constitution and also in terms of the standing orders of Parliament, standing order number 17, which gives the Public Accounts Committee the power to analyze, go through all the statements of expenditure and income for ministries, for government agencies, and for local authorities and parastatals, and any other person that receives money from the public. Then in general, portfolio committees in Parliament are also empowered to, on a regular basis, receive quarterly reports from ministries that they superintend on how the ministries are utilizing the budgets and how the programming of government is being done. So they are empowered by the same standing order number 21, which gives portfolio committees the right to supervise and give oversight over how public resources are being spent.
Mm-hmm. Year in, year out, we see the Auditor General stating that we have companies that were given money but did not deliver. We have money that was overspent by government agencies or ministries. What is it that you as Parliament then do after these audits are presented to Parliament?
I think the system of Parliament, there must be a regular coordination between portfolio committees and the public accounts, which I think is not that strengthened at the moment, because portfolio committees, they supervise expenditure as it happens. Public accounts committee then looks at the expenditure that has already been incurred, and the Auditor General has already gone through the books and issued a report. So we can make sure that Parliament regularly ensures that there is no financial irregularities by insisting that portfolio committees do their work. And also when the Auditor General has then now audited the account, which I think is a very important exercise, and the Parliament's role now will then be to go through every ministry's audited financial statement and look at the audit recommendations by the Auditor General to ensure that the anomalies that the Auditor General has unearthed are rectified, and also to prevent future recurrence of such issues. So that's where Parliament comes in. It's the Parliament's responsibility now to call the entities that are concerned after the Auditor General has done their job, then go through the Auditor General's recommendations and ensure that those recommendations are fulfilled. But the biggest problem that we have every year is that the Auditor General releases about 350 recommendations. And you'll see in the next report that maybe only 20% of those recommendations have been fulfilled. And the ministries, they ignore. What we did as public accounts this year was that we wanted to ensure that everyone who is in the Auditor General's report is given an opportunity to account to Parliament. So it's impossible for us to call all the ministries, all the parastatals, or all the local authorities, because they run, I think, up to close to 400 different entities. So what we did is we wrote letters to everyone that appeared in the 2023 Auditor General's report, asking them to give us feedback on the progress that they would have made in terms of implementing. So when they respond, that's when you see the gaps. And it's then Parliament's job to ensure that through a monitoring mechanism that we have at Parliament, we then follow up and ensure that the recommendations are fulfilled. But the biggest problem is not the ministry. Because if you go through the Auditor General report, we've got two big problems. The first problem is the issue of direct payments. In terms of the Public Finance Management Act, the ministries themselves are the ones that are supposed to initiate direct payments. But you will see, if you go through the Auditor General, every year 400 million, 500 million in direct payments are flagged by the Auditor General because they don't emanate from the ministries concerned. I think the reason why we summoned the Permanent Secretary, the main reason which he gave was that the ministry is now, government as a whole, is operating one foreign currency account. But when they do payments, they don't consult the entities. Sometimes suppliers are paid without the ministry's knowing. And there are suppliers that have appeared before Public Accounts Committee and claimed that under oath that there are people in the Ministry of Finance that demand bribes to process payments. A claim which, when the Permanent Secretary came, obviously we then discovered that it could not be sustained. But those are issues that suppliers will be coming to Parliament to inform us. So the issue of direct payments, we have insisted that the Ministry of Finance should not initiate direct payments, but the respective ministry is the one that must initiate the direct payments and request the Ministry of Finance to pay. And for you to request for a forex payment to be done, it means that the ministry must have the ZIG equivalent. And the Ministry of Finance law is just merely to pay. So that is not happening at the moment. And the Public Accounts Committee has insisted that it should happen as prescribed by the Public Finance Management Act. So that's one of the biggest issues that you always see in the Auditor General's report. Then the second issue is the emergence of a cartel of suppliers that are stealing from government. So you will see that one of the biggest problems that I had before I was removed was that we compiled a list of companies, about 300 companies, that received the public funds and failed to deliver or partially delivered. You receive US dollars to supply cars, then you, instead of supplying 60 cars, they only supply 2. So when we did an audit of those companies, we discovered that it's a few companies. They go to the register of companies, they create different companies. So they will go to the Ministry of Finance, get a tender to supply vehicles, get money, they don't supply, or they partially supply. They go to the Minister of Justice, do the same. So when they then go to the Minister of Agriculture, they then use another different name. But when we went through the company's documentation, we discovered that it's just the same directors. So what we had done now at public accounts before I was then unceremoniously removed was that we had summoned all those companies, everyone that had received money from government and had not supplied the required goods to account. So the inquiry was then stopped somewhere. I'm not sure whether it will continue. But that is the biggest problem. And it's clear that there is connivance between these tenderpreneurs and the officials in the government. Because I will give you an example. You go to one entity, you discover that they have paid for 50 cars and only 30 has been delivered. Then there's no effort at all from the presiding officer, the accounting officer, to follow up and even evoke legal proceedings against those companies, because they would have received their bribes already. So they would just sit there and not follow up. And in some instances, you find that they even settle with such companies. A whole permanent secretary would then just decide that, okay, 20 matters are with because magapiwa mari kwaita inflation, so chiregera revenue kuita se kuita. So those are the issues that we meet. But that cartel should be fought so that we introduce transparency in the government. And to make matters worse, when I went to Ethiopia with the ZAG chairperson, he was complaining to me also to say, Chairman, please help us. There's this company which I will not mention, but they got money from us to supply 6 vehicles. They only supplied 1. Then I said, if in ZAG, they steal from ZAG. But you see, this is happening every government department, including even the president's office. They've got suppliers that got money which they don't supply them. So this is the problem that I think Parliament needs to do. Is the role of Parliament. Once the Auditor General is done, Parliament should make sure that all those companies are publicly shamed, they are brought to book. And I want to commend the Permanent Secretary for the Minister of Finance. He is the one who complied that list for companies that receive money and don't supply. And to my surprise, one of the entities then wrote to Parliament complaining about why I was summoning those companies, and it's the chairman of the Public Service Commission who then wrote to the Speaker. And I stood my ground because it was interference with my work as a member of Parliament, because once the Public Accounts has made a decision to summon a head of an entity, can't then write to Parliament, to the Speaker, to complain. And this is what happened in my case, for example. But it's a debate for another day. What we just need to ensure is that we need to ensure that even when Public Accounts Committee is meeting, they must bring other law enforcement entities, like ZAC, for example. ZAC should be able to come and sit and follow through a public hearing of the Public Accounts Committee, so that if they see a customer, it's easy for them. They can then just deal with that customer there and there, so that we don't just have talk shows without action.
It seems to be a lot of work. How much power does Parliament have when you summon a person and they decide not to come? We've had the issue of contempt of Parliament. How powerful is it really? If someone is charged with contempt of Parliament, what are the consequences?
No, Parliament has powers in terms of the Constitution. It's just that most of the chairpersons of portfolio committee don't exercise that power. And also, the other problem that I've seen is that there's also then interference at Parliament admin level, because for you to raise contempt charges, you have to work through the Parliament administration. They are the ones that must issue the summons and so forth. So sometimes the committee makes a recommendation that we must summon someone, or we must charge them with contempt. And then you see there will be delays in the letter coming out of the Clerk of Parliament's office. But that's another debate. But in terms of the law, the powers are very clear. If you are summoned, previously we used to have the powers to take someone from the committee straight to prison for a week, which we then amended. People felt that it was a bit drastic. I'm sure you remember the parent issue and the other issues. So now that power is there, but if you are charged by contempt of parliament, there are consequences that you can face. But at public accounts, I must say that we never had an issue. We almost issued summons to the PS of Minister of Finance, but later on when he came, we discovered that he was not in contempt. I think it's just used not to respond to Parliament's scope, but with public accounts, he then ended up coming. So the ministers, I think, by and large, they come, but the committees themselves must ensure that the process is not undermined. Because if you summon someone or if you request a document, because the law is very clear, we can summon anyone except the president. So only the president can't be summoned by Parliament. But whilst we are still there, we had also, when I was still chairperson of the public accounts, a very interesting scenario in that we wanted to summon the office of the president. And there was a different interpretation by Parliament. Parliament then interprets the law to say even anyone who works in the office of the president can't be summoned. But that's a wrong interpretation. The protection is on the president. But the chief secretary to cabinet can be summoned because he has a budget that he is administering, a very big budget for that matter. So we didn't then succeed with that situation because of that interpretation, which I think can also be challenged in the future, so that everyone is accountable.
The Constitution in its current state, the powers that it gives to Parliament, would you want to see it amended? Would you feel that there is need for an amendment, maybe to improve the powers that Parliament has, or maybe to include powers of committees, maybe beyond what is given, what is guaranteed in the Constitution as in its current state?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem is not really that the Constitution itself does not give sufficient powers to Parliament. The powers are there, but it's a question of the modalities of ensuring that those powers are implemented and the decisions of Parliament are fulfilled. For example, in terms of the Constitution, if a committee issues a parliamentary report, like the public accounts, the law is very clear. Within 10 days of Parliament passing that report and the recommendations of Parliament, the Minister of Finance must issue Treasury minutes to Parliament, detailing out what the executive will do to ensure that the recommendations are passed. So it's watertight. Once the recommendations are done, the Parliament has passed the report, the Minister must come to Parliament. But you will see that one of the biggest problems that we have with the Minister of Finance is that before I left the public accounts chairmanship, we had done almost 20 reports. And it's the first time that we had done, the Parliament has done such a large volume of reports. The other Parliament, I think the whole 5 years, we only did 3. But in a year, we did 20. And only one Treasury minute came. So there is a backlog of Treasury minutes. But this is an issue now of Parliament admin, which is now facilitating the Minister in ensuring that they get scot-free. They are not held accountable. Because if Parliament admin insists on the 10-day period, but you see that the system really works. The Minister will come with the Treasury minutes, and there will be debate and the implementation of the resolution. But I think what only needs to be done is I think we need to strengthen the Auditor General's office so that one, they don't rely on the Minister of Finance for funding, because what we have also seen is that a easier way of ensuring that the Auditor General office is dysfunctional is by the ministry not releasing funds. So if you see currently now, they have not received over 50% of their allocation. So without money, that means that the volume of audits that they can do is very thin, and most of the work is then subcontracted. And this is an issue that I think is impacting on the ability of the Auditor General from performing their function. So they need to have a separate funding mechanism. Then also, the Minister of Finance has got too much powers over the appointments. Like one of the biggest issues now is that we have an acting Auditor General that has been acting for over 2 years now, when the law is clear that the vacant position in the Auditor General must be filled within 6 months. But now this is the second year. So you can see that the Auditor General struggles because one, she must hold the government to account, but she is also human, she's acting, she also wants a contract to be renewed, so she has to go back to the minister once every while to go and check whether there is now a new appointment. So it's undermining the effectiveness of the Auditor General. And also even the chairman of the audit committee, it's now over a year, the minister is not appointing. So you can see those are ways in which the government can end up undermining the institutions that are set up by government, but not because the constitution itself has no enough safeguards, but it's in the implementation that where the problem is. But I'm sure it's something that the Parliament can resolve.
Thank you very much.
All right.